Got a black king glitter.
Picture this. You're standing in the most sacred space imaginable, a place built entirely around reverence, ritual, and just this deep, abiding respect for the divine.
Right, the center of their whole universe, really.
Exactly. Everything in this building, from the architecture to the daily rhythms of the people inside, points toward the one true God. And then this man struts through the doors.
Oh, this guy.
Yeah, a man who has literally named himself God Manifest, and he doesn't just, walk around. He marches right up to the holy altar, and on that altar, he sacrifices a pig.
Which, I mean, in the context of this culture, is the ultimate desecration. It's an act engineered to violate everything that space stands for on this visceral spiritual level.
But he doesn't stop there. He then hauls in this massive statue of the Greek god Zeus and sets it right in the center of the temple, the exact spot where the presence of God was supposed to dwell.
It's just wild to even picture.
It really is. So, welcome to this deep dive. Today we are looking at a stack of historical analyses detailing a truly mind-bending era. We're zooming in on the 2nd century BC.
Yeah, that murky, highly volatile period of time between the Old and New Testament.
Right. And our mission today is to explore how a sacred 1,400-year-old institution lost its soul to greed and bribery. How that exact corruption set the stage for the trial of Jesus. And how the ancient playbook for Hellenistic cultural domination perfectly mirrors the digital habits you engage in every single day.
It's a lot to cover, but the parallels are crazy.
Okay, let's unpack this. We have to start with the guy who sacrificed the pig, right?
We really do, because his mindset drives everything that follows. So his given name was Antiochus IV, but he styled himself as Antiochus Epiphanes, which translates directly to God manifest on earth.
Talk about an ego.
Oh, massive ego. And his ambition wasn't merely, territorial expansion. He was waging a war of cultural assimilation. His goal was to take all these distinct, unique cultures under his empire and just flatten them into one homogenized Hellenistic or Greek society.
And reading through these historical texts, what really stands out is that he didn't always have to use a sword to get people to assimilate.
No, not at all.
The sources outline how many citizens actually eagerly compromised. Like, they started building Greek-style gymnasiums right in Jerusalem.
Which was a huge deal back then.
Huge. Because to really grasp the gravity of this, you have to understand that Greek athletic games were performed naked.
Right.
The texts record that some Jewish men actually underwent these painful primitive surgeries to reverse the physical marks of their circumcision.
I mean, just think about the physical and psychological toll of that.
They literally mutilated themselves just so they could exercise in the gymnasium without standing out or feeling ashamed in front of the dominant culture.
What's fascinating here is how that level of external cultural pressure fundamentally reshaped religious leadership from the top down.
How so?
Well, when you have a populace that's desperate for social currency, that's desperate to fit in, the institutions governing them are going to fracture. What we see happen at the temple wasn't just a minor administrative shuffle. It was a total structural shift from spiritual devotion to raw institutional power.
I want to break down the sheer mathematical scale of that shift because it is staggering.
The numbers are insane.
They really are. So for nearly 1,400 years, from roughly 1560 BC all the way to 172 BC, the role of the high priest was strictly passed down through a very specific bloodline.
The Zadokian lineage.
Right, descending from Eleazar and Aaron. And over 14 centuries, there were exactly 43 high priests.
43 in 1,400 years.
If you do the math on that, you're looking at men holding that sacred office for over 30 years each, on average.
Because it was a lifetime appointment, based entirely on a sacred mandate. There were no campaigns, there were no fundraising dinners. You were born to the lineage and you served the divine.
Until a man named Jason enters the picture.
Jason.
Jason looks at this sacred office and decides he simply wants the power. So he goes to Antiochus and he illegally buys the priesthood with a massive financial bribe. And to get the job, he actually has his own brother ousted.
The second that bribe is accepted, a 1,400-year unbroken chain shatters. The sacred lineage is entirely broken.
The best way I can conceptualize this is by imagining a hostile corporate takeover, but on a spiritual level.
That's a great way to look at it.
Imagine a 1,400-year-old company driven by a pure, unwavering mission. Suddenly, the entire board of directors is fired and replaced by whoever writes the biggest check. Instantly, the institution is stripped of its soul. It becomes this transactional machine.
Yeah, completely hollowed out.
Because the numbers after Jason are just wild. Over the next 240 years, a staggering 38 different high priests cycled through that office.
That math really tells the whole story. You drop from an average tenure of over 3 decades down to about 6 years per priest. The office was just reduced to a rotating political tool, bought and paid for by the highest bidder.
Right.
And when the highest religious office in the land becomes a den of corruption, the truly faithful are forced to make a profound choice.
Because you can't have that level of rot at the core without the devout noticing. Which brings us to a sect called the Essenes. The Essenes look at this revolving door of purchased priests and basically say, we are out.
Yeah, they completely abandoned the temple in Jerusalem.
But it is crucial to note they didn't leave because they stopped believing in God.
Oh, far from it. They left because the institution that claimed to represent God was entirely hollowed out by greed and political ambition. I mean, they felt they couldn't worship in a space run by illegitimate actors.
So they fled.
Exactly. They fled into the desolate desert, specifically to a harsh environment called Qumran.
Wait, Qumran, anyone who knows archaeological history recognizes that name.
Right.
That is where the Dead Sea Scrolls were discovered.
And that is no coincidence. The Essenes dedicated their lives in the desert to meticulously copying and preserving the sacred texts. They were safeguarding the actual word of God out in the wilderness, while the elite back in the city were turning the temple into a political marketplace. And that corrupted, illegitimate lineage in Jerusalem didn't just fade away either. It leads us directly to one of the most famous trials in human history.
You are talking about the trial of Jesus.
Yes, the high priest who ultimately interrogated Jesus, sentenced him, and handed him over to the Roman authorities for crucifixion was a man named Caiaphas.
Okay, Caiaphas.
But because of the historical fracture caused by Jason's bribe centuries earlier, Caiaphas had no legitimate right to hold that office. Genealogically, theologically, practically, he was an illegitimate priest.
That is just a massive historical irony. You have an entirely illegitimate, politically appointed priest sitting in judgment, condemning Jesus, the man who, according to the faith, is the only truly legitimate high priest.
Exactly. Caiaphas is the ultimate symbol of the compromised institution, executing the ultimate symbol of spiritual purity.
It's profound.
It is a profound irony, and it took place in a powder keg of cultural desperation. The general public knew the temple leadership was corrupt. They felt the oppression of the Roman and Hellenistic influences, so they were constantly looking for a savior.
Like a military or political messiah to bail them out.
Right. Our sources note that in a 200-year window centered around the life of Jesus, there were roughly 10 to 12 false messiahs who rose up to claim that title.
These were men like Judas the Galilean or Simeon Bar Kokhba.
Yes.
They would gather these massive, passionate followings, lead violent revolts against the cultural powers, and then inevitably they would be hunted down and killed. And in every single one of those cases, when the leader was executed, the movement died with him.
The followers either scattered back to their homes or were killed themselves.
But Jesus is the singular exception in that historical window. His movement didn't scatter after the crucifixion. It exploded across the known world.
And what's wild is how it exploded.
Here's where it gets really interesting, though. If you look at how that movement spread, the very tools of Hellenistic oppression were actually hijacked to fuel it.
The language itself.
Yes. Think about Alexander the Great. He used the Greek language as a weapon of conquest. He wanted one unified language so he could control the minds and commerce of his empire. But because Greek became the universal tongue, Jewish scholars in Egypt had previously translated the Hebrew scriptures into Greek.
The translation known as the Septuagint.
Right.
The implications of that translation are staggering when you really think about the mechanics of it. By forcing the entire Mediterranean world to learn Greek, Alexander the Great unknowingly laid the infrastructure for his own cultural disruption.
It's like he built the highway they used to escape.
Exactly.
Right.
The prophecies of the Messiah, the ancient Hebrew texts, were suddenly readable by practically anyone, anywhere in the known world. The empire designed the language for subjugation, but it became the perfect delivery system for a revolutionary message.
It is brilliant. The very thing meant to erase their culture became the vehicle to broadcast it globally. But shifting back to the temple itself, neither the first temple nor the second temple survived history.
No, they didn't.
And the historical diagnoses for why they fell hold up a really uncomfortable mirror to our culture today.
They do. The historical analyses in our sources point to a diagnosis by a second-century scholar. He analyzed the fall of both structures and concluded that the first temple fell to the Babylonians primarily because of idolatry.
Meaning they lost their love for God.
Right, the people fundamentally lost their love for God. But the second temple, the one destroyed by the Romans in 70 AD, fell because of internal strife, hatred, and corruption. They lost their love for people.
Those two failures perfectly map onto the two greatest commandments Jesus gave. Love God and love your neighbor.
Yep, it's that simple.
Failing to do those two things literally brought down the civilization's most critical institutions. And the sources we are analyzing make a compelling case that the Hellenistic culture that eroded those ancient values hasn't disappeared.
Not at all.
It looks incredibly similar to the distractions and pressures pulling at you, the listener, right now.
We can trace this through 4 specific avenues, or doors, of cultural assimilation. Ancient Hellenism used these exact mechanisms to shift a population's focus, and the modern equivalents are almost identical.
Okay, let's go through them.
The first door is education.
In the ancient world, Hellenistic education was about immersing the youth in Greek philosophy. It wasn't about forcefully banning the Hebrew texts. It was about subtly reframing them.
Exactly. It's insidious.
Our sources compare this directly to modern educational environments where foundational biblical accounts are treated as just, quaint myths. The danger isn't outright attack. It's being conditioned to quietly doubt the supernatural while elevating secular philosophy as the only true source of wisdom.
But controlling the mind is only the first step. Once you shift their intellectual foundation, you need to capture their emotional devotion, which brings us to the second door, athletics.
Antiochus built immense stadiums to shift the people's worship. I have to admit, I was a little confused when I first read this part of the notes. I understand how education changes a culture, but why are sports considered a door of assimilation? I mean, it's just a game, right?
Well, in the ancient Greek context, it was never just a game. The athletic events were deeply religious ceremonies. They were quite literally dedicated to gods like Zeus or Apollo, complete with sacrifices before the events began.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. So when a citizen poured their time, energy, and identity into the stadium, they were redirecting the devotion that previously belonged in the temple. Look at modern sports culture.
Okay, I see where you're going.
The sheer volume of time, emotional energy, and financial sacrifice poured into a football team, for example, mirrors a level of ultimate devotion that historically was reserved only for the divine. The team essentially becomes the idol.
So once you have their minds in the classroom and their devotion in the stadium, you need to control what they know. That leads naturally to the third door, information.
Ah, yes.
Yeah.
Information.
Back then, it was the decrees of the empire, the official narrative telling you exactly what to think and who your enemies were. Today, that door takes the form of our hyper-partisan, algorithm-driven media.
It's everywhere.
It is. And reading our notes on this, I really want to emphasize a crucial point here. This is not about one political side being the good guys and the other being the bad guys. We're just reporting what the sources say. And the historical warning here is that the media ecosystem makes every side believe they are flawlessly right and that everyone else is maliciously wrong.
Which breeds a culture of absolute suspicion. When all information is designed to anger you or confirm your biases, you lose the communal ability to discern truth.
You just stay in your bubble.
Exactly. Whether you're scrolling a news feed or asking a question to an AI like ChatGPT, the default posture of our culture has become one of deep distrust. You stop looking for shared reality and start looking for ammunition.
And if partisan information makes us suspicious of each other, the fourth door ensures we don't ever talk about it. The fourth door is entertainment.
The amphitheater.
In the ancient world, the Greek amphitheater was the primary tool for cultural programming. It dictated the morals, the jokes, and the values of the society. Today, that theater isn't a massive stone building. It's the glowing rectangle in your pocket.
A smartphone.
Yes, it's the endless late-night scrolling through content that subtly, incrementally shifts your moral baselines.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, the parallel is actually chilling.
Yeah.
The ultimate danger of modern entertainment isn't necessarily the content itself. It is the physical and psychological posture it forces you into. Passive individual consumption.
Right.
You are sitting by yourself, in the dark, isolated from human connection. Historically speaking, stripping people away from their community and isolating them in a theater is exactly how spiritual foundations crumble.
I want to push back on this just a little bit, though.
Sure, go ahead.
Are the tools themselves inherently the enemy? Is the smartphone or the football stadium or the algorithm intrinsically evil? or is it our posture toward them?
That's a great question.
Think about it like this. Our digital screens are simply the new Greek stadium. The physical ancient stadium was just stone and sand. The actual danger was that people were walking into that stadium and voluntarily stripping away their distinctiveness, literally hiding their physical identity, just so they could sit in the bleachers and be accepted by the crowd.
That is a very sharp distinction. The tools are inanimate. The danger is entirely in the posture. It is the voluntary surrender of your identity for the sake of assimilation.
Yeah.
No one is holding a sword to your throat, forcing you to doom scroll for 3 hours a night. No one is mandating that you pledge blind allegiance to a partisan media narrative.
Yeah.
We are opting into it. We are voluntarily walking into the stadium and asking to fit in.
And that leads to a really terrifying realization. Because we are opting in voluntarily through these subtle modern doors, the loss of your faith or your values or your distinctiveness doesn't happen in a massive explosion.
No, it doesn't.
You don't just wake up on a random Tuesday and decide to sacrifice a pig on an altar.
It is a gradual, almost imperceptible erosion. Just look back at the corruption of the Zadokian priesthood we discussed. That 1400-year lineage didn't collapse in a single week. It happened bribe by bribe, compromise by compromise, over decades.
Our sources reference a progression that I think is incredibly vital to understand. The core idea is that no one crumbles in a day. The distance from an invasive thought to a devastating action is much shorter than we like to admit.
This raises an important question about the mechanics of the human heart. How does that creeping compromise actually work? The texts point to a very specific 4-step progression of this fade, which directly mirrors the ancient wisdom found in the Psalms.
Okay, let's walk through it. First, you listen. You don't necessarily agree with the new cultural narrative or the slight moral compromise, but you start walking and you give it your ear. You let the idea into your space.
Then you linger. You stick around. You start spending more of your time in that environment. Maybe it's a toxic digital space, a highly partisan echo chamber, or just consuming media that degrades your values. You get comfortable being around it.
Next, you laugh.
Yeah, that's a big one.
This is a critical turning point. The things that used to genuinely shock you, the things that violated your core beliefs, are now just a punchline. The edge wears off. You've been lingering so long that the desecration becomes entertaining.
And finally, you mock. You join the crowd. You make the transition from passively consuming the culture to actively scoffing at the very faith or values you used to hold dear. It's the exact progression the psalmist warned about. Walking in the counsel of the wicked, then standing in the way of sinners, and finally sitting down in the seat of scoffers.
Wow.
It happens one passive, seemingly harmless choice at a time.
So I want to speak directly to you, the person listening to this right now. The source texts demand that we ask some hard, reflective questions. Look at your own life and your own daily habits. How did you get here? Was there a time in your life when you were truly fired up for the Word of God?
That's a tough question to sit with.
It is. When your convictions were unshakable, when you felt deeply connected to a community of faith and a sense of purpose. But now does he feel distant? Have the edges of your convictions softened?
That feeling of distance is the primary symptom of the slow fade. It requires us to confront whether we've slowly allowed the noise of the digital stadium and the isolation of our screens to hollow out our interior lives, the exact same way that political bribery hollowed out the ancient temple.
So what does this all mean? It means we aren't studying some ancient dead concept called Hellenism. We are living inside of it. The pressure to assimilate, to buy your status, to isolate yourself in the glowing theater of your phone, to pledge blind loyalty to a political faction. That playbook is running in your life today.
It absolutely is.
And the cure to a corrupt, isolating culture remains exactly what it was 2,000 years ago, a radical, intentional return to deeply loving God and genuinely loving the people around you.
The tools of assimilation are designed to keep you distracted, angry, and divided. The only effective antidote to that kind of cultural programming is intentional devotion and real physical community.
Which brings me to a final thought I want you to mull over as we wrap up this deep dive. Think back to those devout Essenes we talked about earlier.
The ones who went to the desert.
Right. They looked at a deeply corrupt culture and they made the hard choice to flee. Out there, in the harsh wilderness, they preserved their most sacred texts, their ultimate truth, in clay jars. We call them the Dead Sea Scrolls. They buried them in a cave, and when we discovered them 2,000 years later, perfectly preserved, they told us exactly what those people valued: above all else.
Yeah, their whole legacy was in those jars.
Exactly. So I want you to imagine for a second that all of your daily digital habits, your screen time data, your social media algorithms, and your media consumption were downloaded, put into a clay jar, and buried in a cave today. If future historians discovered your scrolls 2,000 years from now, looking at exactly where you spent your time, your money, and your attention, what god would they conclude you worshipped?
Thanks for joining us on this hour on the Archive Hour. Join us on our next hour as we bring you more adventures from the Bible.